Welcome back to educator.com. Today we're going to go over the 2012 AP FRQ response. So make sure to print this out and follow along as we go along. So the 2012 AP FRQ response, we'll start off with question number 1. And it deals with Rankenland. So assume that this country, Rankenland, is in a recession. And you're basically drawing a production possibilities frontier with this. Now, typically, when you're dealing with a recession, you're thinking aggregate supply and aggregate demand. So this question might be a little bit tricky in that they ask you to draw a production possibilities frontier, but don't be fooled. It's a very simple production possibilities graph that you're going to deal with here. So drawing with food and clothing here. So clothing is on the x-axis, or it could be on the y-axis. It actually doesn't matter. So you would get the first point in part A for drawing a production possibilities frontier. Now, if you drew a straight line, that would work as well. So you get that first point here. The second point is by drawing A, and it's underneath the production possibilities frontier, or it's a point of underutilization, or it's also a point of inefficiency. So one of the things that you really have to know is that a recession is when you're not employing all your resources here. So this is what point A represents. And for getting this graph right, that's 1 point. And the second point is simply drawing that A underneath the production possibilities frontier. And so this part is 2 points here. Part B is a little bit more complicated. But again, just a couple of simple ways to get the points here. So you're assuming that Rankenland is going to have expansionary monetary policy. So that's the original assumption there. And you're going to try to find out what is the open market operation that is going to expand the money supply. It's really simple. You buy bonds. So a good way to remember this is that buying bonds is going to bloat the economy. Selling bonds is going to shrink the economy in terms of the money supply. So buy, bloat the money supply. Sell is going to shrink the money supply. So the open market operation that's going to increase the money supply is to buy bonds. So that will get you the first point here. Now the second point is going to be drawing a correctly labeled money market graph. And so this is what you do here. You draw this here. The x-axis is going to be quantity of money. The y-axis is going to be the nominal interest rate. And then you have a downward sloping money demand curve. And then you have a straight vertical money supply, and label this as MS1. So drawing this correctly, labeling this as M1 here and R1, you're going to get the second point. Okay, now the third point is being able to show what happens when the Fed buys bonds. Now the question is the money supply affected or is the money demand affected? And again, anytime the Fed uses monetary policy, it's the money supply that's affected. So the MS, or the money supply, shifts to the right. And this is the third point. So you have a rightward shift, and that leads to a lower interest rate, and that's going to get you that third point here. And also understanding that the money supply shifts to the right, so the real interest rates will fall. So that will get you the fourth point here. Now, is it necessary to actually write it out like this? Probably not. I mean, if you can label it and show it on the graph, that's perfectly sufficient. I think one of the things that you want to know on this AP macroeconomics exam is that sometimes if you write too much, you can actually get yourself in a little bit of trouble. If you can explain it in really short words, if you can explain it on a graph, that's absolutely fine here. So let's go to part 3, figure out how to figure this question out, part 3 here. So part 3 actually deals with that if there's no change in price level, what's going to happen to the real interest rate if there's no change in price level? So here is basically knowing an equation here. So what is the equation for nominal and real? So the real interest rate actually equals the nominal interest rate minus inflation. Now the question here is, if the price level is constant, what that means here is that inflation is out of the picture. So I'm gonna cross this out here. So there's no inflation, so this is 0 here. So assuming that is the case, what's going to happen to the real interest rate? Well, the nominal has gone down, so the real goes down as well. So the real interest rate goes down. So again, if you just draw this out here, but if you really want to write it out, real interest rate goes down. So that's basically what's going on, and that will get you the 5th point on this particular problem. Now the final point here is they're asking you on part B here, given your answer in part B regarding the real interest rate, again, the real interest rate has gone down. Okay, so they're going to ask you part 4 based on the idea the real interest rate has gone down. Now, I'll point that out, why that's actually important. But given the answer to part B regarding the real interest rate, what happens to the real gross domestic product in the short run? Well, the GDP, or the aggregate demand, increases. And why is that the case? Because lower interest rates spur more consumption and or investment spending. So basically what's going on is when interest rates are lower, then consumers are going to take out more loans to buy more consumer products, and businesses are going to invest more. And so that's basically what this question is after, and you get the 6th point for part B if you can get that. Now, you want to make sure you have this macroeconomics equation, y equals c plus I plus g plus nx. If interest rates go down, then basically I goes up or c goes up, and if either c or I goes up, then y goes up, or real GDP. So that's part B, and you can potentially get 6 points for part B and 2 points for part A. Part C is going to give you 4 points, so you'll have a total of 12 possible points on this particular free response question. So let's take a look at part C here. Part C is going to ask you the following. If Rankin-Land has a current account deficit, and the currency is called the Bera, what's going to happen to the current account deficit because of the change in real GDP? All right, so this is identifying, what's going to happen in the money market as a result of a change in real GDP. Now the GDP has increased, right? So there's going to be an increase in GDP. So how is that going to affect the current account deficit? Okay, so the real GDP increases. So the real GDP has increased. Okay. Now the reason why the real GDP has increased is that consumption spending has increased, right? So if the consumption spending has increased, the reason is that imports. So imports have increased. Okay. Imports have increased, so relatively speaking, the NX has decreased. Okay. As a result, you get 1 point for saying that the current account deficit has increased. Again, it's great that the real GDP has increased, but because the imports have actually also increased, then the current account deficit, basically our trade balance, has basically gone into the negative, and so therefore the current account deficit has increased. Okay, so that is part C1 here, and the second point is explaining that the real GDP causes an increase in income, so you also want to emphasize that. So income, real income, so the real GDP has increased, and so the real income has increased as well, which leads to net exports decreasing. So you get 1 point for identifying that the current account deficit will decrease. And the second point is saying that the increase in real GDP increases the income, and that's going to cause the net exports to decrease. So that's 2 points right there for part 1. Okay, and the final 2 points deals with what's going to happen to the value of the Bera when the GDP when the GDP increases here. All right, well, the international BERA, what you're going to have is that there's going to be an increase in supply. So increase in supply of the BERA. Okay. So let's say you have the exchange rate right here, and this is the BERA. So this is the quantity of the BERA. So this is supply, and here's the demand. Okay, so if there's a case that there's a change in real GDP, well, the supply is going to increase for the BERA, and what's going to happen is that Q1 to Q2, that the exchange rate is actually going to go down. So what's going to happen here is that the BERA will depreciate, so you get 1 point for that because supply increases. And you get the second point for being able to do that. Now, nowhere in this problem requires you to actually draw the graph, but it helps you. If it helps you to get the correct answer, then obviously you're more than free to do that. Okay, question number 2. So question number 2 is going to deal with more of the Federal Reserve. Okay, so you're looking at the bank and the required reserves, excess reserves of loans, the demand deposits, and owner's equity. And you're figuring out, well, what is the reserve requirement? Okay, so this is a very straightforward answer here. So the reserve requirement, another way of putting it is, what is the required reserve ratio? What is the amount that banks must hold in their reserves from deposits? Now, there's deposits of $100,000, and the required reserves, there's 10,000 here. So very simple math here. So you get 1 point here for saying 10,000 divided by 100,000. So the reserve requirement is 0.1 or 10%. So if you have that, you get 1 point right here for part A. Part B obviously is going to be a little bit more complicated than that. So assuming that Luis withdraws $5,000 in cash from the bank, by how much will the reserves change here? Well, if it's a case that there's a withdrawal, well, the bank reserves will decrease by 5,000. Because there are excess reserves of 5,000, if there's a withdrawal, then the reserve requirement, it really doesn't change. So it decreases by 5,000. So that's very straightforward. A $5,000 withdrawal will actually just change the reserves by that amount. Okay. Now, part 2 here, what is the initial effect of the M1 on the measure of the money supply? So this is actually kind of interesting. When you withdraw $5,000, what is the effect on M1? And the answer is that there's no effect. Why is there no effect? Because, and the idea has to do with cash. Cash or check is just a transfer within M1. And so there is no actually change, increase, or decrease of M1, but rather within. It's like an intramural exchange rather than an intercollegiate exchange is within M1. So when you withdraw cash, there's actually no impact on the money supply. Now, if you deposit cash into a checking, then it's the same exact thing. There's no change in the actual money supply. Okay, number 3, or part 3 of B. So let's say there's a withdrawal. What is the new value of the excess reserves? Again, based on the reserve requirement. Now, this one is actually kind of interesting because you have to do a little bit more thinking here. So if you withdraw 5,000, then what ends up happening is that there's 95,000. So if you take, let's break it down here, $1,000 minus $5,000, then the amount here is $5,000. Now, that's from the liability standpoint. If you take a look at that, that is the new amount of liabilities, because now there's only 95,000 that you really have to give back to your bank customers. Now, in terms of the assets, that's going to be a little bit different here. So in terms of assets, the amount of loans is going to be $85,000. Now the required reserves, now it's no longer the $10,000. The required reserves is actually going to be $9,500. Okay, so if you take a look at that, the amount of actual reserves there are versus the amount of excess reserves, it's going to be a little bit different here, because you're going to have $5,000. So this is the required reserves. Okay, and you're going to have $500 of excess reserves. So the value of the new excess reserves, it's not going to be $5,000. Remember, that was withdrawn, but now it's only going to be $500. So the excess reserves as a result of that is $500. So if you get all three of these right for part B, then that's 3 points. Okay. Now let's look at part C right here. So this is just being able to get that 1 point here. So assuming that John withdraws money in excess of the excess reserves, and assuming no loans are actually called in, then what is Mitra Bank going to do to actually cover that situation? And basically, there's two possible answers. You either borrow from another bank in the federal funds market, or the Fed funds market, or borrow from the Fed at the discount rate. So keep in mind, if Bank of America runs out of money, meaning that they don't have any excess reserves, then they're going to primarily borrow from the federal funds market. But if they can't do that, then they'll borrow from directly from the Federal Reserve. So that will give you 5 points right there total. Okay, and finally, question number 3. Let's go ahead and figure out what question number 3 is saying on this 2012 examination. So you're dealing with Anderson Land in long-run equilibrium and full employment. Okay, so you're drawing for part A, 1 and 2. You're going to get 2 points here, drawing the long run, short run, and aggregate demand, and wages are fixed. So this is very straightforward here. Usually this question you're going to find in question number 1, but let's roll with this here. They have the aggregate supply and aggregate demand in a question number 3 here. So to get 2 points here, you want to make sure you have the following labels here. Okay, so you have the real GDP, or the RGDP, or Y. And then here you have the aggregate price level. Okay, and then you have the aggregate demand right here, AD. And then you have the SRAS right here. You have the SRAS. And then you have the long run right here. You have the LRAS. Dot, 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 dot. And here's PL1. And this is Y1. So you get 1 point for showing the aggregate demand SRAS at PL1, and then you have Y1. And then the second point is just drawing the LRAS at the intersection of where SRAS and AD is. So you get just 2 points for being able to draw this. Now again, it's a little curious on this particular exam that they had this on question number 3. Usually this is more of a question number 1. But again, anytime you see aggregate demand, aggregate supply in long-run equilibrium, make sure it's like a big asterisk with the LRAS intersecting where SRAS and AD intersect. So that's 2 points here. Now the second point here, or the third point, assuming that there's an increase in exports, show the effect that higher exports are going to have, and then correctly label the Y2 and the P2 here. Now, again, this is where I'm going to draw certain things that might not necessarily be what you have to, but let's take a look. Y equals C plus I plus G plus NX. Now, if there's an increase in exports, what's going on is that the NX is going to increase. So NX is going to increase. So Y, therefore, is going to increase. So now AD1 is now AD2. And so now you have here Y2 and PL2. So that will get you 1 point for part B here. So again, is this absolutely necessary? No, but this is basically what's going on. So the key is being able to have the Y2 and the PL2, and that will get you the 3rd point. Okay, part C. C is actually dealing with what is the impact on exports on real wages in the short run. So what's going to happen to real wages in the short run? Well, you take a look at this here. Price level has gone up, has increased. So the price level has increased from PL1 to PL2. So the price level has increased. Nominal wages, in the short run, we know that nominal wages are sticky, okay, or sticky or fixed. So meaning that they're not very flexible. So as a result, wages stay the same, price level goes up, and so the real wages, obviously, so the real wages will fall. They're going to go down. So imagine you're making $10 an hour and then the price goes up from $100 to $110. Your wage stays the same. So real wages are actually going to decrease. Your purchasing power is going to go down. Okay, so that will get you the 4th point. And the final 2 points for part D, let's go over this here. So resulting from the increase in exports, Anderson Land is going to increase expenditures on new container ships and equipment. So what component of aggregate demand is going to change? So there's more investment. Well, this is very straightforward. There's more containers and ships and equipment. So they're asking, what's going to increase here? I. So basically, if you just say that, if this would probably just be enough, but some of you guys actually want to write it out. So investment increases. So that will get you the 1st point here. Okay, so that's +1 here. So what's the impact in the long run aggregate supply? Well, and you got to explain this here. So to get that 2nd point here, you're going to say that the LRAS increases and then shifts to the right. Now, why is it the case? Because the capital stock has increased. So it's not enough just to say that the LRAS increases or shifts to the right. You have to know that because of this investment, business investment, that the capital stock has increased. So when you have that, it shifts to the right, capital stock increases, you're going to get the 5th or the 6th and final point for part C, and you'll get a full 6 points right. You'll get a full 6 points here. So this is actually 2 points here. So it's 2, 1, 1, 2. You'll get 6 points, and you're going to ace the FRQ portion of the macro exam. Thank you for watching educator.com.